So thank you everyone for being here. Really appreciate you all joining us to receive this final share out on this project and to honor the work done by the principal investigator, Dr. Catherine Brinkley, the co-PI, Dr. Mike Boswell, and the community-based organizations that signed on to participate, as well as the students that contributed to the research. This project started in May 2022. And a lot of folks have contributed to its development and deliverables, some of which are no longer here at CARB or even at the Centers for Regional Change. So I figured I would give them a little bit of a shout out before we started. So first off is Bernadette Austin, formerly the Executive Director of the Centers for Regional Change at UC Davis and now CEO at CivicWell, as well as Ilanka Slaughter, the original contract manager who developed the initial scope of work alongside the PIs, Leslie Baruti here at CARB, who is here with us today. Hi, Leslie, and who retired in this past spring and took over the contract management before retiring. So between myself and Ilanka. As well as all the CARB staff that have contributed to reviewing materials, participating in progress meetings, and supporting the capacity building aspect of this project. So I am glad that we are all here, and I am glad to have all of you here today to share in some of the results of this project. There are both tangible tools that have emerged as a result of this project, and we will be talking and sharing out a little bit about those. There are also some less tangible results, including the relationships and the knowledge built through this work and the lessons learned from the contract administration. So I'm grateful to have been able to attend several of the workshops led by the CBOs, and I can attest as to the quality of the outreach that was conducted under the contract and the impact it carried. And I'm also very grateful for having been able to work alongside Drs. Brinkley and Boswell as they worked on this project. I'll leave it here for now on my end and let Dr. Brinkley take the stage. Catherine, all yours.
Thank you, Cynthia. All right, so we're going to present the feedback from work that covers 3 priority areas for CARB. That's reducing vehicle miles traveled, decarbonization of the built environment, and improving zero emission vehicle readiness. We're going to not showcase 2 online tools, but talk about them, which these were 2 tools that were created through this project. And those tools and gathering plans from cities and counties across California enabled us to do some of the first comprehensive plan evaluations of how local jurisdictions are tackling these priority areas. So we conducted in total 3 evaluations across the 482 cities and 58 counties and 253 climate action plans in California, which is a lot of plan reading. So we're very grateful for our student teams and our staff research teams for help with that. And then we partnered with 5 CBOs, some of whom are in the room. So I believe the chat is active. So if you all would like to share your affiliations, what brought you here today, that can help get some of the conversation going in the chat. And then I think Cynthia is going to monitor the chat during the talk, and we'll hold questions until the end, but you can jot them down in the chat for now for us to consider later. So those 5 community-based organizations held workshops across the state, and we're really thankful to the 367 plus attendees who came to those workshops, provided feedback, represented over 155 organizations to help us think through how to do better local climate action planning. And we have 2 sets of recommendations at the end of this presentation. The first is focused on what CARB could do with the next scoping plan update. There's some recommendations that spill over into other state agencies and what they might do. And then there's another set of recommendations that's really focused on local governments and the CBOs that help local governments plan, as well as anybody in the room who who lives in a city or in a county, which is all of us, to get engaged. So these are the two planning tools we created. The first is a search engine across California's general plans, and Cynthia is going to post this presentation as a PDF with the links that will be live for both of these tools. So now you can search for any term across the general plans, and this is a project that the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Initiatives, I think we're going to say Lucky or Lucy, which was formerly OPR, the Office of Planning and Research, is working on extending. So we're working on gathering the plan updates for that. And then the next tool, which is led by Adrian Greaves and Dr. Mike Boswell at Cal Poly, gathers all of the climate action plans and makes them available in a database. So you can track which jurisdictions have climate action plans, and then you can access the PDFs of those climate plans. And then you'll notice there's a link in the lower left-hand corner for a very short tutorial that you can send to folks or view yourself that walks you through how to use each of these tools, which are really meant to engage communities in climate planning by enabling them to find examples from nearby and comparable jurisdictions to nudge. So just an example from the plan search tool. So you can type in the search term environmental justice, and you can now see which jurisdictions mention that term. 120 out of the 482 cities, nearly half, more than half the counties. So that's wonderful for complying with Senate Bill 1000, just addressing that term. And we'll talk about how state agencies can also use these tools as they think about crafting policy that's sensitive to where local jurisdictions are already starting to make headway. So with that, I'm delighted to share out some of the results from our the first state level plan evaluations of general plans and CAPs. And again, this wasn't possible before because there was no comprehensive database of general plans. Dr. Boswell and Adrian Greaves have worked for many years on the CAP database and have done plan evaluations on that before as well, but not across all plans. So 23 of the 58 counties and 230 cities have created a climate action plan. And what I want to underscore with this slide is that the general plans often reference climate action plans, they reference hazard plans, they reference a whole universe of plans, just as the climate action plans also reference many other plan types too. What we noticed when we were doing the plan evaluation is that jurisdictions prefer a non-CEQA certified CAP. And while the CARB's scoping plan right now does talk about supporting non-CEQA qualified CAPs, there is more of a nudge towards CEQA qualifications. Mike, do you want to add anything for this?
No.
Okay, all right, I'll keep rolling then. When we looked at whether larger cities or higher income jurisdictions were more likely to create a CAP, we did not find a clear relationship. I know that there's you may think that a larger jurisdiction perhaps has more staff and could focus more, but what we really found was that CAPs are created in both small and large jurisdictions. And this agrees with previous studies that have shown that there's really two factors that influence whether or not a community undertakes a climate action plan, which is a voluntary plan. So one would be city staff dedicated to environmental policy. And then the other is presence of a higher education institution like a university, college, that kind of nudges that climate action plan forward. So again, relying on CAPs and general plans and thinking about how they can work together is a good way to help local jurisdictions move forward. However, when we started looking into both the climate action plans and the general plans, we noted that in some jurisdictions, people would use their general plan for the climate action planning. In other jurisdictions, they would use their climate action plan to move certain priorities forward. So the planning vehicles work in tandem. They're not updated at the same time. And just a small data point from that, the top 10 cities with the most mentions of zero emission vehicle terms were not the same top 10 for climate action plans. So you have multiple different planning vehicles working in tandem, oftentimes referencing one another depending on when the climate action plan was updated or when the general plan was updated. So just emphasizing again that there's not one right way to do climate action planning. There's multiple ways, and jurisdictions will rely on different planning vehicles depending on where they are in their update process, and where they feel like they can spend staff time and planning. So for the next scoping plan update, we recommend working closely with the Land Use and Climate Initiative Governor's Office on the general plan guideline updates. Again, so that the scoping plan and the general plan guideline updates share language around supporting multiple plan types to advance goals. To that end, hazard plans are not currently mentioned in the 2022 CARB scoping plan. And the community-based organizations that we worked with and the community partners who attended the workshops noted that there are many jurisdictions that would rely on their hazard plans to address climate planning, climate readiness planning. So just a little bit of background. Hazard mitigation plans are revised to meet the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, compliance, making jurisdictions eligible for relief and funding and federal assistance. So hazard plans are a great way to address many of the different climate readiness goals, and those can include not only hazards like flooding, but also where to site renewable energy as well. So for the next CARB scoping plan, CARB can consider addressing how to use hazard plans in addition to CAPs and general plans for climate readiness planning. While we noted that we didn't find a difference between large jurisdictions or the median household income in a jurisdiction, or the percent of the population that identified as white as a predictor for producing climate action plans, there is a large body of studies that have noted a positive correlation between places that have higher income levels and adopting local climate policy. And for this reason, equity was a thread that we focused on throughout the plan evaluations. This is also important for state agencies to keep in mind, because jurisdictions that tend to have a larger percentage of the population at lower median household incomes will need to do more focus on outreach to make sure that those jurisdictions are have lower thresholds for engaging in climate readiness. And I'll touch on this a little bit more when we get to the recommendations from the community-based organizations. But for now, wanted to note that there's still obviously a need to support with funding assistance and with technical assistance, the creation of climate action plans, as well as infusing other plan types like hazard plans or general plans with climate readiness. And some ideas that came up for that would be reducing the grant application barriers. We heard from CBOs often that that grants were oversubscribed in some cases, and that's really difficult to manage because you might put out a new call and then it's very, very popular. So it can be difficult to weigh that. So one one step to reduce the barrier would be to have short letters of interest for concepts before the full grant is due, to reduce the upfront cost. of filling out that entire application. Another would be a iterative feedback process on any grant application that allows applicants to provide feedback to the agency on what's working or what's not working or what could work better. And then one idea that the community-based organizations came up with as well was identifying eligible jurisdictions based on their plan contents. So there's a precedent for this with the pro-housing designation. And now that we have the climate action plans and the general plans readily available, it'd be easy for state agencies to search for particular terms or evaluate plans and then say jurisdictions that have not yet planned for climate readiness are eligible for this based on their current plan, or jurisdictions that already have policies in place for zero emission vehicles in their general plan, for example, are eligible for this, to kind of nudge the planning in line with the funding opportunities. And then one other idea was a dedicated staff position, which could act as a liaison with community-based organizations, helping work more closely with those organizations and their local governments. And there's precedent for this with tribal liaison positions, which could help with more targeted outreach for specific grants. All right, so now I'm going to move into the 3 priority areas that we focused on. So the first was reducing vehicle miles traveled. And one example that the 2022 scoping plan had for reducing vehicle miles traveled was to reduce or eliminate minimum parking standards. Minimum parking is a wonderful handle for a policy. You can search very easily for minimum parking and you can see which jurisdictions are starting to nudge that forward. And UCLA Prof. Donald Shoup has done a lot of work to push this policy approach. However, when you look across plans, you'll notice that about 1/4 of the cities mention minimum parking, and about 1/5 of the counties as well. So you can see that there's more work to be done, at least in the general plan, the general plans. Another idea is implementing complete streets, and complete streets is a concept where bike lanes and pedestrian and vehicular traffic are all on the same level, but with not hard dividers, but landscape dividers or paint dividers to reduce the speed of traffic. And this is a topic that you can see is broadly mentioned across general plans, with about 1/2 of the general plans addressing complete streets, or picking up that policy idea. And similar for counties. So I bring this up because there are many other policies in CARB's suite of how to reduce vehicle miles traveled, which do not have a very neat handle on them. So that's what this tag on the slide is meant to remind us of, is let's put a handle on every policy we want to see. So that way, when we've tagged it, we can see which jurisdictions are addressing that policy. So some other examples from the scoping plan are increasing access to public transit by increasing density of development near transit. So you might look up transit-oriented development. That would be a potential tag for that. Or increasing public access to clean mobility options. You can look at electric shuttle, and you can go on Plan Search right now and see who's talking about that. Bike share, car share, implement parking pricing, and then amend zoning or development codes to enable mixed-use, walkable, transit-oriented, compact infill. And then the last piece is preserve natural and working lands. So I think our big overarching recommendation for state agencies who are crafting guidance for local jurisdictions, and this would be housing and community development, CARB through its there's a general plan guidance piece, and then especially LCI's general plan updates, is that state agencies should look to see what local jurisdictions are using as their terminologies and which approaches are gaining traction, and then support some of that momentum. And then for every approach, identify a handle so that that policy can be identified within a general plan or within a climate action plan or within a hazard plan, so that you can see whether the approach is being followed. And that's not to say that every single approach will be adopted in every single jurisdiction. There will be different approaches and different suites of approaches, but this will at least enable state agencies to know when the technical assistance that they're providing is being taken up at the local level, and also to align local level priorities with state level recommendations. So that was vehicle miles traveled. The same is true for,
Catherine, one
yes.
quick interruption, just that there's a clarification question in the chat. Could you share again what you mean by handle?
Handle, yes. So a term or a single word or a group of words, like complete streets would be a handle. Electric vehicle is a handle. And I'll provide this inverse handle here. So there is a handle for decarbonization. That'd be the term decarbonization, which is a pretty special term. However, when you look across California jurisdictions, you see that well, very few jurisdictions mention the term decarbonization. So I'll give more examples of handles going throughout. So one of the recommendations for the scoping plan under building decarbonization is to adopt all electric new construction REACH codes. So you could look up REACH codes across all climate action plans or across all general plans and see which jurisdictions are using that phrase. And planning is so full of jargon that it can be really difficult to identify clear handles or handles that translate very well. So all electric would be a handle that you could use. And when you look at all electric, you can see that there's some momentum towards that, with 24 cities mentioning all electric and 8 counties, but it's still very nascent, but it's there. So that would be a good indicator to state agencies who are drafting guiding policy that all electric is a great term to use, and they could then reference jurisdictions that are using that term, look up how they're using it in situ, and then recommend those policy approaches. Another great term is renewable energy. So if you look up renewable energy across California's general plans, you see that 305 cities, so nearly all, and 49 out of the 58 counties mention renewable energy. So that's a great handle that you can look for in plans and then see how jurisdictions are addressing renewable energy. And the same is true for a term like solar, where you can see broad scale adoption of that term and consensus around what that term means. However, when you look at a term like decarbonization, which is one of the priorities that CARB has in the scoping plan, only 4 cities mention the term decarbonization and only 3 counties. So it is definitely a handle in the sense that it means decarbonization means reducing carbon intensity. However, local jurisdictions haven't quite incorporated that term in their planning. And so whenever state agencies create policy guidance with a term that is not already in use at the local level, it creates a lot of confusion and need to translate what that term means. And there may be reasons why local jurisdictions prefer or don't prefer that term. So building decarbonization is common in policy documents, however, not so common in local planning documents. And then community-based organizations also noted in the workshops that terms like reducing vehicle miles traveled is unfamiliar, or it's confusing, or that's a term that carries negative connotations because of mileage taxes or dependence on gas tax funding in particular regions. So because California is so varied with coastal, inland, valley, and political variation as well, there will be different terms that are preferred in different places. So the recommendation for CARB and for any state agency is when crafting new guidance to look at how local jurisdictions are using common terminology so that it's easier for those local jurisdictions and the community-based organizations that are helping them to recognize the handle of the policy and to bridge that recommendation with local priorities and to translate terminology as well. So if we turn to zero emission vehicle readiness, the good news here is that the term that's used fits the tag. It fits the handle. So when you look for electric vehicle, that terminology is the same terminology that's used in climate action plans and general plans across the state. So that was an excellent choice in terminology. One of the goals in the scoping plan was to convert local government fleets to zero emission vehicles and to provide EV charging in public sites. So again, just noting that that state level guidance aligns with local planning terminology and approaches. So a little celebration there. However, when we look at what's in the plans and we score the plans, we note that California might fall short of the state goal for transit agencies to purchase zero emission buses. And part of the reason we're adding caution here is because of the 64 ZEV policies and county plans, only 20 mention public, and there's more focus on the private zero emission vehicle use than on the public. Exercise should allow state agencies to adjust a little bit and say, all right, well, if we're providing guidance and maybe we're not meeting this, maybe we need to do a deeper dive into how to support local jurisdictions in converting their public fleets. The other frustrating piece of the plan evaluation is that we noted that a lot of plans will set intentions, so they may mention should explore a public fleet conversion, so that should doesn't have will do it, and that setting of intentions as opposed to committing actions. So for all state level guidance, we're recommending reiterating that local jurisdictions should create firm benchmarks for measuring progress, and this is especially important for community-based organizations who are helping hold their local governments accountable to those promises. So that includes setting timelines, creating measurable outcomes, identifying potential funding sources, and this can help signal to state agencies where local jurisdictions know to go for funding and where they may not know to go to funding, and then dedicating staff or a department to oversee the policy. So there was a broad lack of this, and that's not particularly unsurprising. It's not a particularly surprising finding because there have been so few plan evaluation studies, so there's not as many eyes on how jurisdictions are planning, and I think that the more folks who are paying attention to how jurisdictions are planning, the more likely we are to all learn from each other and craft stronger local level policies. So this feeds into some of the recommendations for the local jurisdictions as well. So some more good news from this plan evaluation. We found that policies, electric vehicle policies and general plans and climate action plans are both associated with implementation. So if you were tempted to think that, yes, well, if it's not in the plan, maybe it's still happening. We have good reason to believe that that's not how it works. So there are only 55 city level jurisdictions that don't have EV charging ports, according to federal data sources. And more details of this are in the report, which Cynthia will make available online in the coming weeks. But we also note that 40 of those 55 cities did not mention zero emission vehicle terms in their climate action plan nor their general plan. So they both lack the planning and the implementation. And then we also were able to conduct statistical regression analysis on both term mentions of electric vehicle as well as policy strength and correlate that with siting charging stations. So when we did that, we found that the number of electric vehicle charging ports is significantly associated with whether or not a city creates a cap. And that is controlling for percent-wide population and median household income to get at those issues of equity as well. We ran spatial regression and the results were similar. And so the takeaway here is for every city with a climate action plan, we can expect 30 additional electric vehicle ports compared to cities without a cap. And we have similar findings for general plans with term mentions for electric vehicles and planning for electric vehicles correlating with the implementation of charging stations. So cities with a cap are nearly 3 times as likely to have created a municipal reach code that goes above and beyond state requirements for charging stations. And a plan that addresses ZEV readiness has greater likelihood of implementing those policies. So just a little bit of caution about these findings. Plans are constantly in process, so communities are constantly looking at their plan, updating their plan. So our results don't really indicate whether jurisdictions that already have the charging ports are more likely to be emboldened to say yes to charging ports in their climate action plan or their general plan. But we did find an association between having a cap, planning for electric vehicles, and siting charging stations. And for state agencies and community-based organizations that want to conduct sort of a very rapid plan evaluation, this finding also should encourage you, because now you can search for terms like electric vehicle and note that that correlates with implementation outcomes, which again reiterates why it's so important to have a handle for every policy that you're encouraging. So whether that handle is complete streets or electric vehicle, but identifying a handle that is already in play at the local level will help the policy gain traction. So, and here's those same findings for general plans. So the number of plans that, the number of mentions of electric vehicle didn't correlate with policy score. And that's again, because a lot of plans lack strong planning with measurable benchmarks, but the number of mentions of electric vehicle did correlate with implementation. So the overarching recommendation here is that state guidance should encourage the creation of strong policies with benchmarks for measuring implementation. We aimed to do this same sort of evaluation with the number of mentions of terms for the other priority areas, but it was a little bit difficult because the terms weren't as discrete as electric vehicle. So energy, for example, the number of mentions, the number of times that a jurisdiction mentioned energy did not neatly correlate with the policy score for addressing energy, nor did it correlate with enacting reach codes that would go above and beyond state guidance. And we use the 2019 and the 2022 reach code databases for that. So again, this policy recommendation goes back to making sure that for community-based organizations that they're really helping to guide local jurisdictions to creating better benchmarks within the plan. And the same was true for vehicle miles traveled. So we didn't find correlation between the number of times that vehicle miles traveled was mentioned in a plan, nor the strength of the policy. So reiterating again that state guidance and CBOs should work with local governments to create policy specific benchmarks within plans to encourage better action. And then another piece that kind of brings nuance to this is that we noted that jurisdictions might create really strong policies in their climate action plan, but not their general plan, or vice versa. So they might create really strong policies in their general plan, but not their climate action plan. And some of that, that could have something to do with the local politics of the way that each plan was created. It could have something to do with the timing, where it can take many years to create a general plan. Sometimes the climate action plan can also take many years, but not always. So the recommendation for state agencies here is to recognize this variance in local policy adoption, and then recommend suites of policy approaches that could be more favorable. And we saw this as well in the policy approaches. So you may have a climate action plan that just does a bang up job with zero emission vehicles, but doesn't really address vehicle miles traveled as reducing vehicle miles traveled with the same level of attention. And then our plan evaluation also surfaced some concerns around supporting jurisdictions to address equity. So in addition to noting that most jurisdictions set intentions but don't have specific benchmarks, we also noted that most jurisdictions set intentions, but very few address equitable equity as part of the policy. So for example, of the 12 counties on 126 cities that mention electric vehicles, only 6 cities included equity in their policy making. So this would be citing e-bikes in lower median household income neighborhoods, or vehicle charging for affordable housing, as in the city of Arcata general plan, or converting public fleets to all electric fleets. So one suggestion here is to use a equity in all policy approach, so that every single policy within a general plan or within a climate action plan needs to consider the equity implications and then address those. Another recommendation could be for the scoping plan to reference OPR, now LCI's equity checklist for updates. And then another way to address this lack of equity planning would be to celebrate the jurisdictions that are doing an incredible job with their equity planning by creating a scorecard, or pre-qualifying those jurisdictions for funding, or just generally celebrating them on social media and raising the profile of their planning efforts. And many CBOs are doing something similar to this. So thinking of how to do more of that around particular issues. And then another piece to the plan evaluation was, and working with community-based organizations, was looking at priorities that are there at the local level but aren't yet reflected up into the scoping plan. So CBOs brought up that rural issues are not well reflected in the scoping plan. So rural is mentioned only 9 times without specific actions. So one way to address this in the next scoping plan update would be to use the community research approach that we modeled in this contract, which was a research entity subcontracting with community-based organizations working across the state through paid efforts to co-facilitate community workshops. And the reason that that model I think is so powerful is because those CBOs are very trusted locally to bring folks to the table and to deliver, and people feel very heard. And so that allows those voices to come to the fore more for crafting guiding policy. A focus on more rural issues like protecting natural lands could be a really wonderful fit with the 30 by 30 initiative, which is to protect 30% of wildlands in California by 2030. So there's a big push and a lot of funding right now at the international level, the national level, the state level, all of which should culminate in bringing rural issues to the fore. And one of those issues specifically was,
Catherine, can I jump in just on that last slide? I wanted to highlight something.
yeah,
Because there's been conversation in the chat about natural and working lands, and so I just wanted to call out the screenshot here of the general plans search database, which using the handle working lands that noted that 8 out of 482 cities mention working lands in their general plans, and 5 out of 58 counties do so.
Thank you, Cynthia. So in focusing on working lands, the CBOs requested that CARB think about and account for ecosystem services in the next update of the scoping plan. And this would allow crediting for those natural and working land management pieces that feed into local mitigation. And there's a lot of momentum and effort right now with pilot approaches working together with tribes. So here's just one example to help seed that conversation going forward. So right now, ecosystem services is a term that's mentioned but isn't associated with any specific actions in the 2022 scoping plan. So this would be a way to dig in and really listen to those rural jurisdictions and how they want to see ecosystem services reflected in state level guidance and priorities. Along those lines, one overarching recommendation is to facilitate more peer learning. So just as local jurisdictions work together with community-based organizations, they're also looking at what their peers within the county and adjacent counties are doing to meet climate readiness goals. And to facilitate that peer-to-peer learning, plans need to be easily located, they need to be frequently reviewed. And in order for groups like us to create databases that are easily searchable, plans need to have, or it would be very helpful if they had a cover page that identified the document when it was last updated, who authored it. And this would also bring plans into compliance with Americans with Disabilities Act guidelines. So the recommendation here is for CARB and LCI and HCD to provide that cover page guidance so that plans can be findable, accessible, interpretable, and in a format that's reusable, so a machine readable PDF. So this seems very obvious, and I do think it is not rocket science in a way, but at the same time, having visited every jurisdiction's webpage, as Dr. Boswell and I both have many, many times, to try and find the plan, find if it's the correct year that it's adopted, has it been modified since last time? It's very difficult for even planning experts like ourselves. So you can imagine when community members who aren't steeped in the planning jargon try to go find their plan and note whether it's the updated plan, it's frustrating. So our goal is to take that frustration out of the planning process and make it easier to learn from great examples. So a findable plan would be one that's in a standard place. So all plans could be submitted to a state level database or a library of adopted plans. They could be easily accessible with an API. So this would connect plans to specific databases, which would allow rapid plan evaluation, for example. They should have standard metadata, which would be that cover page, and we have an example later on of what that cover page should include based on feedback from our workshops and community meetings. And then machine readable PDF. So some plans are only scanned or only paper documents, and none of them had digital object identifiers on them that are sort of like a timestamp of a PDF. So this is an example of the plan cover page. Again, very simple: title, jurisdiction, link to shape files, which are constantly changing, date the plan was adopted, whether it's CEQA certified or not, which firm created the plan, and then the digital object identification. So now moving on to the feedback from the community-based organizations. So again, I want to reiterate that the 5 community-based organizations we worked with were experts in managing their attendee lists, and it took a lot of balance, because in some cases you might want to invite the local utilities to a workshop. In other cases, you know that you can't quite invite the local utilities if you're going to have other nonprofit orgs in the room, and so you need to create one workshop for one group, another workshop for the other, to bridge those groups and have really productive conversations. And the CBOs are very attuned to how to do that within each local context. And they did a wonderful job. So in total, they conducted 13 workshops, and they had 367 attendees representing 155 organizations. And about 40% were from local government, another 40% were from nonprofits, often working with local governments. There were representation from industry as well as from tribes. So again, the recommendation back to state agencies is to consider this contract model where CBO partners are funded for their expertise in convening really meaningful listening sessions because they are trusted locally. We also had really excellent feedback on CARB attending. So local communities felt acknowledged and heard, and they felt that it was really wonderful, especially for CARB to attend and listen, not necessarily present, but be invited when it was appropriate. And they really enjoyed that CARB came to them, because I think a lot of local jurisdictions feel like there's a lot of going to state agencies or going to the state government, as opposed to having the state government come to them in a space that is convened locally. So the recommendation there, again, is that state agencies attend local climate capacity meetings, not necessarily as conveners, but as invitees. And then through these workshops, one big feedback that was, one big portion of the feedback that was surfaced was that CARB priority policies should be reframed in terms of local values, and that this would improve adoption and implementation. So, for example, here's a quote from one of the communities that said, "There are other needs of greater importance in many communities right now: healthcare access, poverty, wildfire threat, and understanding rural needs will be crucial in having the state's climate goals adopted." So this is where those listening sessions can help local governments think about how the climate readiness fits within their local priorities, and then reflect back up. Here's what the priorities are for us. How could the state level priorities meet us there? So as state agencies are crafting their scoping or their technical assistance, working together with CBOs to facilitate those listening sessions where state representatives attend, I think is going to be really important to this iterative feedback. So back to the grants again. Of course, funding is always a major roadblock with any new initiative. And the CBOs and community groups noted that a lot of grant programs they felt were oversubscribed, or they didn't have enough capacity to find the grants and then apply to them. So there were quotes that fell into this this category. So a significant barrier to access to funding and grant opportunities is either due to a lack of capacity or knowledge about these opportunities. This is where that liaison might help targeting or feeding out grant opportunities to qualified groups. And then another quote was, constricted grant funding timelines for implementation are not aligning with the time needed to build local relationships and capacity. So this is the overall general recommendation would be that state agencies assist with the grant getting and writing, either by having that liaison who can target organizations when new opportunities arise, or through efforts that pre-qualify communities based on plans that they already have in their general or their climate action plan. So noting which jurisdictions are already working towards something, and then helping to move that along. So more feedback from the community workshops where the collaboration was crucial to not overwhelming local governments with individual requests for engagement. So there was a broad consensus that regional collaboration and conversations helped create more coordinated approaches. And there's a recent effort now through the Office of Community Partnerships and Strategic Communications, which has created a grantee list of community-based organizations as a first trusted messenger network. So there's some early precedent here for working in tandem with regional CBOs to bring the local regional conversations back to the state, and also to get state guidance local. Some more feedback from CBOs were hiring full-time staff dedicated to integrating and communicating with coalition networks across communities would be helpful. So again, that sort of regional convening idea, because each region is going to have a different flavor of climate readiness approach that it's piloting and pushing. There was broad appreciation for the learning tools that were created, so that peer-to-peer learning was really valued. And again, that feeds back into the regional coordination there. So this quote says, communities don't know about the options available to them. It's the responsibility of the state, local government to provide these options, make technical info more accessible, and take communities' input and interpret it into policy actions. So the recommendation going forward would be to support climate ready data access and interpretation. So right now we have the data access piece just launched, but we don't have enough of the interpretation. So what does decarbonization mean? What does decarbonization mean in rural communities versus urban coastal communities? So more of that interpretation and peer-to-peer learning with regional convening and support for the regional convening is what the community-based orgs and members who attended the workshops would like to see. So now we're entering the last bit with the local actions and then the CARB actions. So local actions, the recommendations for local jurisdictions were to conduct assessments with climate inventory, greenhouse gas inventory, asset maps. And we also heard from community-based organizations that they would like help with creating those greenhouse gas inventories. There was a legislative bill to support that, which did not get passed in the last cycle. So that would have funded CARB to do just that. So there's some legislative pieces that need to align with state agency pieces that need to align with CBOs and local action to get all the wheels to turn together. And then developing feasible plans based on measurable benchmarks For example, adopting a municipal reach code, tagging it with that handle reach code, using strong policy language that commits a jurisdiction to action, even as city council or county governments cycle in and out. Policies should include a timeline that also allows community-based organizations and the public to hold electeds accountable for what's in the plan. Dedicating an officer staff helps local jurisdictions know who's responsible and who's going to take the action. And then some identification of potential funding sources so that there's an idea of where to go when that's needed. Working very closely with local community orgs for outreach and to have robust engagement. So this was, again, really the idea of one of our first CARB project officers, Alanka, who had worked closely with community-based organizations on climate readiness and recognized the very valuable role the community orgs play in local planning. And then identifying promising approaches based on how other local jurisdictions are planning for action by looking across plans, looking across municipal code. And then the last bit is considering an equity in all policies approach. And this equity in all builds on another concept in planning, which is a health in all policies approach, where which, if you want to read more about that, Jason Coburn from Berkeley has done a lot of work with Richmond on health in all policies. So an equity in all policies is a very closely aligned way to think about intentionally designing equity into every piece that's worked on. And then specifically for CARB, capacity building and partnership is a big takeaway from this 2-year effort. So establishing a state liaison for community-based organizations would be one way to do that. Attending more local climate capacity building workshops, which I think the CARB folks who did attend enjoyed it, and the people who invited them loved having them there. So that was very much a win-win. Better aligning priorities. So reviewing local plans, climate action plans, general plans, hazard mitigation plans for ways that jurisdictions are already talking about climate readiness, and then infusing state level guidance with that aligned terminology. Focusing more on rural issues, so working lands, ecosystem services, 30 by 30 preservation goals. There's a lot more that can be done there to raise up those pathways to mitigation and adaptation. Developing more knowledge sharing platforms like Plan Search and the Climate Action Plan database, assisting with jurisdiction-specific greenhouse gas inventories, which I know state agencies are thinking about. They could work in partnership with community-based organizations, as community-based organizations said they were ready to help, because there might be a template that's filled out with a greenhouse gas inventory that then more specific or nuanced local data needs to be fed in to realign it. And again, there was a bill that did not pass, but could be brought back to help support that, to allocate funding towards greenhouse gas inventories. In the scoping plans and guidance for LCI and for CARB and for HCD, making sure that there's implementation benchmarks for each priority, including an equity checklist that's specific for each priority. And then the last bit is continuing to think through how to reduce the competitive grant application burden, particularly for small jurisdictions or disadvantaged communities. So more pre-qualifying template letters that are shorter upfront. And then I'll end, and we can take some questions, by noting that Plan Search won the California American Planning Association Award for Academic Excellence. So this is broadly recognized by the planning community as a great tool. This is Aniket Bangamar, who's our lead software developer, and Cameron Kabosa, who is a graduate student and is now a planner working in the Inland Empire. So really grateful for that support. And then thanking our nonprofit partners, the Sierra Business Council, which covers a whopping 22 counties, very impressive, does a great job. BayCan, covering the Bay Area and bringing folks together there. The Robert Redford Conservancy at Pitzer College, and the Los Angeles Regional Collaborative for Climate Action and Sustainability in LA, and then the Climate Action Campaign as well. So they were all wonderful partners with deep working knowledge of moving the needle on climate action planning in each of their regions and how to do it with joy. And then I'll thank our team at the Center for Regional Change at UC Davis as well. We have excellent cohorts of undergrads and grad students who are graduating and looking for jobs in planning and climate readiness planning. So with that, I'll stop sharing and we can discuss.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And thank you to everyone who's been having an active conversation in the chat. Really appreciate it. A lot of work, as you can see, was done over this project period, and noting some takeaways on my end that there is not one right way to do climate action. There's a lot of different ways and a lot of different planning vehicles, and not all planning documents are created equal either. Really appreciate the concrete suggestion around cover pages for general plans and metadata and making them more easily accessible in order to reduce the planning frustration or the frustration with planning documents that people may encounter. Also, I always like celebrating victories. I think it's incredibly important when you put so much work into a project. It is incredibly important to recognize the people that contributed to it and to note that moment. So wanted to pull up a couple of the questions from the chat, but I also welcome folks to chime in if I don't pull up your specific question and if you want to share it live. But one is, will there be an outreach effort to share these databases with CBOs engaged in local climate action planning? And it connects also to a couple other questions about CBOs, like, are there statewide CBOs that are keeping tabs on the CAP processes and CAP implementation, and trying to hold jurisdictions throughout the state accountable in their development of CAPs?
I can say just a few words, and then I'll note that Kaylee Reynolds from Sierra Business Council and Aaron Hoots from LARC are both here. So we have some of our CBOs in the room who can speak further about the actions that they're doing regionally. We're continuing to collect plans for Plan Search. I know, Dr. Boswell, you're continuing to collect plans for the Climate Action Plan database. Unfortunately, with state funding, we're constantly trying to figure out how to fund these efforts and streamline them. And I did mention that it's not rocket science, but honestly, if you're designing a rocket to get to the moon, you do want to fine tune and dot all your I's and cross all your T's. And this is very much part of that, to launch and making sure that we're bringing everyone along. So Mike, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll just add that we're always in progress and updating, trying to keep the CAP database up to date. In fact, we have a partial update that we've completed that we're probably going to publicly release here in a few weeks. But it updates mainly the counts in which jurisdictions have CAPs, not all of the data in the database.
And Kaylee and Aaron, did you want to say anything about how you're continuing the efforts locally, regionally?
Sure. Hi all, my name is Erin Coots. I am the director of the Los Angeles Regional Collaborative for Climate Action and Sustainability. So one of the things that LARC does is hold bi-monthly meetings. So we do 6 meetings a year. It gives us an opportunity to connect with our local jurisdictions and community organizations that are creating and advocating for better caps. So when there are updates to this, we've shared them out a couple times. Folks have found it helpful. So thanks so much for making this resource available.
Yeah, thanks. Kayla Reynolds at Sierra Business Council, and we did these workshops for the Sierra region, and we put together a blog and have our recommendations out. So all of that information is readily available on SBC's website all the time. And then we find that the type of recommendations that are being made today and made public are things that we will continue to advocate for and push forward. And if policy language becomes available around these, that's something we will advocate for within our coalitions that we manage as well. So really exciting, glad to be a part of it.
Thank you, Kaylee and Erin. Austin, I see that your hand's up.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I'm with LCI and starting to do a lot of thinking about climate action plans with our team. One of your last slides with the CARD recommendations, one of the bullets mentions identify measurable actions. Can you expand on what that means and maybe give some examples of what some of those actions might be?
Sure. I think there's multiple ways of thinking about policy creation. One would be that the state is leading and local jurisdictions are following. And that is not the framework that we used for this proposal. The framework we used is that there's a groundswell of local action, which should encourage state level guidance to share it further. And so the big recommendation there would be if there's a specific area that the state wants to see advancement in, to look at how local jurisdictions are already making that advancement. So another great example would be with my colleague Jonathan London and Julie Z. They've looked at environmental justice and noted that many jurisdictions adopted environmental justice policies, labeling those policies as environmental justice well before the state mandate. So they kind of emboldened the state to take further action, to recommend further action based on what was already on the ground. And so the recommendation that we have is if there's a particular policy that the state wants to elevate, is looking for that in those climate action plans or in those general plans. And then mirroring that same language that local jurisdictions are already using to talk about the priority. Did that get at your question, Austin? It was a
yeah, it did. It's a very different answer than I expected. So
okay.
Thanks very much.
I look forward to
I
talking.
thought the words just meant something else. Thank you.
Thank you both. Elisa, I see that your hand is up. Would you like to unmute?
Yeah, thank you. So I work for the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, and we are the implementers of a block grant from the Department of Conservation called the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program. And what we were trying to build the capacity of local organizations to do collective work within whatever we called region. And we started with sort of larger regions and realized that didn't work very well and ended up on a county level for most of them. And we took a different approach, which I think I'd like to share as a capacity building approach. So we had enough funding to provide, we kind of pre-selected. So in your case, it would be counties, possibly, or cities. And we had sort of best practices that we had already developed. And we gave everybody, we said, look, you're eligible for $250,000 in capacity building funds, but you have to do this self-assessment. And don't try to look good. Just tell us, here's our best practices. How are you on this? How are you on bringing tribes in? How are you on, do you have a strong, facilitated partnership? Do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have the other thing? And we actually didn't even make them write it down because we thought they might be embarrassed to have something in writing. We interviewed them afterwards and kind of co-developed a scope of work to help them themselves decide where and how they wanted to build capacity in order to meet the goals. And we did have a goal because we needed to have regional priority plans for our entire region for forest and fire work. And we didn't want to do it for the jurisdictions. We wanted them to do it because that's what's going to actually lead to implementation. So it was a different sort of a model for capacity building where we had them develop their own scope of work, and we just said, you got the money, just tell us what you think you need to do.
Thank you, Lisa, for those comments. One question, let's see, from Amy Augustine that I will relay live. Do you anticipate that there will ever be an action in CAPS for vegetation management to reduce wildfire threats? This is something very important in rural areas. So maybe more directed to Dr. Boswell, if you want to talk about where CAPS are going.
Yeah, so I mean, this was one of the questions that Dr. Brinkley and I were looking at is where are policies showing up in local governments? And we certainly didn't review all local government policy documents. I mean, there's a lot of them out there. So I think the question here is, if you're interested in advancing a policy like that, where might be the best place to put it? And there's a few obvious places. One is possibly a climate action plan. The other is a general plan, possibly in conservation open space element or safety element. And another is a local hazard mitigation plan. But of course, there are wildfire specific strategic plans in communities as well. So that's always a question. I mean, part of what we were, I think, finding and ultimately arguing is it's often probably a good idea for these policies to be in multiple plans. Because in certain jurisdictions, certain plans seem to be more updated or have a stronger implementation focus than other planning documents. So I think partly it's a strategic choice. Like if you want a policy like this at a local level, where is going to be the best place for it to have an impact or to be implemented? With that said, you don't see many of these kinds of actions within a climate action plan. For one, a lot of climate action plans are only addressing GHG reduction in the traditional sectors and really just simply do not go into wildlands management or don't go into adaptation or resilience at all. And so, yeah, I think it's a choice that a local jurisdiction has to make.
Thanks, Mike. I want to open the floor if there's any other questions. I also invite folks that participated in the contract, like if there are other CBO representatives that want to share takeaways that they had during the project, or I know also Ilanka and Leslie are both here too. If there's anything you wanted to bring up from your time working on the contract, please chime in.
I just wanted to thank you so much for that presentation. And it's just gratifying to see how much work has been done on this and how much progress has been made. So thank you. Appreciate it.
I'm going to be off camera because I'm on the maternity leave and my little baby's right here with me. So, but yeah,
baby though too.
we'll see if he wakes up in the next minute. Yeah, no, I just loved seeing some of the recommendations that came out of this process, and some of the quotes that you highlighted from the community members that were able to attend, as creating a different kind of model for the research that was done. That was certainly something that I was really interested in moving forward, and makes me feel good as hey, here's a little seed that was planted in my time there that hopefully will continue to grow. So thank you so much for carrying the work forward.
Thank you, Leslie and Ilanka. Really appreciate it. Catherine, I'm wondering if there's anything like working off of Ilanka's comment. Can you talk a little bit about your experience as a mediator between the state and CBOs and maybe any of the lessons learned there that the state can take in future contracts?
Yeah, I think I'm not saying that this is how state agencies have done it. I'm just gonna paint an unfavorable picture really quick of sometimes how community engagement happens in the research setting too by universities. So sometimes community engagement is conceptualized as just inviting folks to come listen to you talk at them. and that if they show up, that's the community engagement. And I see Anna Suleiman, who's the executive director of the Center for Regional Change, is here as well. So one of the things that we've really, oh, yay, there's Ilanka's baby. One of the things that we've really tried to work on with the Center for Regional Change is helping folks understand how to do meaningful community engagement. And part of that is funding those trusted networks, because people, especially from underrepresented groups, have very limited time. They don't want to waste that time, so they're not going to show up for just anything. And they want to make sure that when they do show up, their voices are heard and they can make an impact. And so I think the model that this grant took with making sure that the CBOs were funded and that they could then pass on that funding to community partners if need be. The funding model we used too also considered that different conveners might need different levels of funding too. So there was flexibility. The application was very simple. And because the Center for Regional Change has been around for 17 years now, we have networks that we are already working with and through. And so I think that also helped. So just thinking about doing partnership, recognizing the networks that already exist, and then providing compensated funding for engagement to support that engagement. Whether, and because it'll take different things to bring different communities out. Sometimes that's childcare, sometimes that's food. So, and Anna is working on a whole suite of public facing how-to checklists with the Center for Regional Change to help create research that is asked for by impacted communities and really serves them. I don't know if you want to say anything else about that, Anna. No, okay.
Thank you very much. Austin, I know that you had your hand up at a moment there. I don't know if you still
Sure.
have.
I don't want to be a hand-raising hog, but I'm interested in the fact that the presentation and discussion here hasn't mentioned target setting, and I'm actually very okay with that, but I'm curious if that topic came up a lot in your research, or I'm curious what CBOs think about. Is guidance needed about target setting? And I may also want to introduce the idea if maybe targets shouldn't necessarily be quantitative or shouldn't be actual about the quantification of GHGs, because we're only so good at that anyways. Maybe it could be things like increasing the portion of school children who walk or bike to school in the community. What can be done at the planning level to support that, or adjusting the jobs housing balance in the jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Something like that. So just wanted to throw that out as a topic, maybe to get people's wheels turning, and see if you have any, you or anybody else has any thoughts on that.
I see Nina with Baycan has joined too, so we have one more CBO partner in the room. I don't know, if our CBOs want to chime in first with that how to navigate goal setting.
I can just a quick SEER perspective. Most of our jurisdictions just do target setting aligned with the state targets because it's difficult to even meet those targets in our jurisdictions. So it's usually not that hard, especially if they, there's usually some socializing to the board of supervisors or the council or, whoever is going to agree to those targets. But beyond that, we typically don't go above and beyond in that way. I think there is sentiment that they do want to set, targets that are maybe less easily quantified. And so that there is like that natural and working lands component of we have increased wildfire resilience, but maybe that's not quantifiable in the same emissions mitigation way that kind of traditionally is done in CAPS. So there is a level of like resilience and adaptation and wanting to quantify those and maybe just like a bar scale or something of this increases resilience or adaptation 2 out of 3 dots or whatever it is in that way. So we get a little creative with the adaptation portion.
Erin, did you have anything you wanted to say about target setting?
No, nothing bad.
Okay. I'll just note that we did address some of the target setting around public EV fleets and just noted that there wasn't as much progress as there wasn't as quite yet there progress in CAPS or general plans on converting public fleets. I think too, with that target setting, I mean, just Austin, just to build off your safe routes to school. So if you were to set a target like increasing the percentage of school kids that walk or bike, you'd first have to know the percentage that you're starting with. And that data can be really difficult to get at the local level or take time and effort. I mean, I know I scan in kids has that program, and not every kid who walks or bikes is part of that program. So just aligning the benchmarks with where data has already been collected too can be a tricky proposition. But that's where the number of charging stations per capita and capacity was an easy one to see implementation wise, and then reach codes, which I think you commented on in the comments as well, as an easy one to see for local action.
Yeah, and on the topic of reach codes, I wanted to bring up one of the comments from Neil Matuka as well, formerly from CARB, that we could have done an additional layer of looking at how many CAPS or general plans mentioned reach codes and comparing that list to the list of actually adopted reach codes that the CEC has to do another link between the planning and the implementation.
Absolutely. And I think too, I mean, I think that Neil also made that comment in the chat, but maybe it wasn't Neil, but I think part of the effort with this multi-year project was to sort of tighten the screws on planning in California by making those local plans visible, trying to align them with municipal code and state guidance, and better align the state guidance that was coming down too. So it's not necessarily more planning, but it is rewarding. The feedback from our community partners is really to reward where planning is happening and make that planning better and more meaningful at the local level, so that it's not just a plan that sits on a shelf that nobody can find. But it is a meaningful blueprint for where the community wants to go.
I'll relay another comment that just came in is on the impact of policy becoming action. Just an observation, in my rural counties of Inyo and Mono, EV charging stations and the purchase of a handful of county EVs has been generally looked down on as pandering to elites. And I think that goes to your comments earlier on about how the different both policies and actions can be seen very differently in different parts of the state.
Absolutely.
All right, we've got 3 minutes left. We could potentially take a last question if there's anyone else that has a burning discussion item. Seeing none, you're welcome to interrupt me, but if not, I think that we can call this to an end and say thank you so much to Catherine for presenting this final progress meeting and wrap up of the project. I'm really looking forward to being able to share the final report. And thank you to everyone for all of your work and your participation.
Yeah. Thank you, CARB partners, and for all of our community-based org partners for helping us surface these important points around climate planning across California. And you know where to find us if you have questions later.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.